Hey everybody, before I get started, I just want to mention a couple of ways that you can engage with me on a more personal level. I have a few avenues set up and I keep focusing on one, and I figured why don't I make a short little video talking about all of them real quick before we get into these episodes. So first thing, Patreon. There's a link in the episode description, in every episode description to the Patreon, as well as a video on the feed called Major Announcement that has all the details of what each tier offers and how much they cost. I implore you to check that out. I offer a lot of cool shit for my patrons. Second thing, the Discord channel. There's also a Discord link in the episode description and in every episode description. I have multiple channels set up there for each show that I'm covering, and it's a great way to just engage with me. I have a channel set up for MMA talk as well. I'm a big MMA fan, so if you're an MMA fan, you can check that out as well. There's a link to the Discord in the episode description. And then lastly, the Facebook and Twitter. Social media. Follow me on there. I post news on there. When I say news, I mean like, hey, I'm stopping covering this show. Hey, I'm starting covering this show. Let me know what you think about this. I do live watches of things on Facebook where like I'll check in and say I'm watching so-and-so show, and then I'll like live comment while I'm watching it, and that'll be cool if maybe you watch that show too and you want to watch along with me, or you're watching it later and you will see my thoughts, which are usually pretty entertaining because I'm usually pretty high when I'm writing them. So check out all those links in each episode description, and let's talk about this episode. Peace.
One mic, one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. One mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, and today I'm here to talk about Season 4, Episode 8 of HBO's Succession, entitled America Decides. Interesting title, as America did in fact not decide who's going to be president in this episode. A matter of fact, a trio of spoiled and petty and non-serious children decided that. And they did this in an episode that is probably going to trigger some pretty unpleasant memories for folks, but that also did a great job, I think, of reminding us just who these people are and how there's no depths to which they are unwilling to stoop. So, I'm talking about this episode, man. This episode was intense. It was triggering. It set the stage for things to get far worse and more contentious in the final 2 episodes than it has been so far in the first 37 of them. These last 2 could be really bad. I think throughout the season and the show as a whole, there have been a number of moments where each of them being each of the Roy children, has done something and we thought, well, shit, maybe this particular Roy child isn't so bad after all. Well, here we are in the third from last episode of the entire series, and yes, they are in fact so bad after all. Straight out of the gate, I knew I was going to need to strap in for this episode because of how it started. Like, it starts with Tom immediately coming out and laying out the election night stakes to Greg, particularly as it pertains to, like, the future of his career, right? So we're like, okay, well, it's election night, shit is heavy duty. And then the music just kind of like, I don't know, did it feel, like, abrupt to you how the music started? Like, I feel like they give us, like, a good 5 to 10 minutes of when they do a cold open, like, a good 5 to 10 minutes. Like, it's not even just one scene. They might give you 2 or 3 scenes before they actually hit the music. And it's like Tom just comes on like, yeah, big night for me. Boom, doom. I'm like, God damn, we just started up, okay. And then when the music ends, immediately we are reminded again about the stakes. Like, Kendall comes in and he's like, Tom, big day, huh? So immediately I'm just like, all right, we've spent like we're 4 minutes into this episode, approximately 2 of which are the opening theme. And already I'm of the understanding that the stakes are quite high. Of course, the central focus for this video is going to be on the Roy siblings, with the exception of Connor. But actually, before I even get started, can I ask you guys a question? And don't like come at me too hard if you think this is a ridiculous assertion. I don't think there's a case for it to be ridiculous. I think there's a case for a disagreement case, but not a ridiculous case. Is the Connor storyline this season Succession's one flaw? Like, what was the point of anything involving Connor this season? Now, granted, there's still 2 more episodes left for them to help me understand Connor's purpose, but they've been really dragging out, even beyond this season, this whole thing of Connor running for president. And I'm like, I guess I'll understand why they're doing this on election day or by the election day episode. Well, now the election day episode is come and gone, and Connor was a non-factor. And I'm just I'm confused regarding why we spent an exorbitant amount of time on this Connor running for president plotline for it seemingly to have not meant anything other than just like providing some, I guess, comic relief moments or moments where you're just like, look how stupid Connor is, or a fresh opportunity to feel better than Connor or to ridicule Connor's naivete. And it's just like, I don't know, I thought it was going to go somewhere narratively where like maybe him running for president was going to have some impact on how election night went. And then they're like leading into this episode, they're like, oh, he's polling at 1%. I'm just like, why is he involved in this? And now the episode's over, and now I'm even more confused about what was the point of the Connor president plotline. Anyway, let's talk about this episode. But I first just want to revisit, and I like to do that for this show in particular, where we stood entering this episode. Because like I always say about this show, most of the important information is non-spoken. And then also, there's so much... because everything is so non-spoken and layered, you could sometimes lose sight of the true motivations or the true direction. You know, characters are constantly lying to conceal their true motives and constantly making moves and plays, and everything is strategy with them. So quite often, the words coming out of their mouths are not how they really feel or the true nature of reality, just what they feel needs to be said at that time to get what they want at that time. So, like I said, I just want to kind of like just a real quick, just like, here's what's going on. So coming in, we have the Democratic nominee, Daniel Jimenez, and the Republican nominee, Jerry Mencken. Now, you recall that Roman is a big fan of Mencken because basically because he's good TV. It doesn't matter how he's good TV, just that he's good TV. But Shiv isn't a fan of his because he's not good TV. He's bad for the country. You know, this was a large aspect of, I believe, the season 3 storyline. Jimenez, we haven't seen. I don't even know if we have visually seen him prior to this episode. The only reason I even knew who he was like there were background scenes where you could see his posters and shit. But I think it's very intentional how little attention they gave to the Democratic nominee. But there's the added issue of the Gojo deal. So Kendall and Roman want the Gojo deal dead, and Mencken will kill it. So of course, I mean, particularly from Roman, as we see in this episode, it's important to him that Mencken win because he wants the Gojo deal dead. Shiv wants the Gojo deal to go through because she's tight with Lucas. She's been giving him information, and presumably under the kind of like, I guess, an unspoken agreement of, I give you information, and when this deal goes through and you own everything, you give me a high-ranking position. And she sees power in her future, which, for the record, Lucas has never agreed to, but that's just where Shiv stands. It also helps that Nate is Jimenez's political advisor, and as we saw last week in his interactions with Kendall, he has some morals. Like, he can't be bribed into stopping the Gojo deal. And again, Kendall didn't offer money. He was just like, hey, we'll give your guy, I think he said, a good coverage in the first 100 days, which, as you guys know in real life, it's a popular thing to look back and say, look at the president's first 100 days. So he's essentially saying, like, hey, we'll say that you had a good first 100 days if you stop the Gojo deal because of the, again, regulations and shit like that. And Nate can see, like, this is some shady shit. I'm not cool with this. So we know where Nate stands and who he's with and who he's aligned with. So coming into this episode, it's win-win for Shiv if Jimenez wins the presidency. The Gojo deal goes through. She's been helping Manson. She sees a powerful role for herself. And of course, it doesn't hurt that she just so happens to agree with Jimenez's politics as well. So early on in the episode, they say exit polls are saying that Jimenez is going to win. Tom's running around like a chicken with his head cut off, trying to manage things like a failing touchscreen, which side note, did anyone else feel like they were making way bigger of a deal of the failing touchscreen than it needed to be? Like, if I was watching, we're not going to bullshit, obviously ATN is meant to be Fox News. If I'm watching Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or whoever the fuck, and fucking Wolf Blitzer is like, oh, the touchscreen's not working, and I'm not going to be like, oh, fuck this, let me turn the channel. Like, I don't give a fuck if the touchscreen works. Like, I'm like, okay, so they're having technical difficulties. That happens all the time, everywhere, in every aspect of life. Like, why would that... I don't know what they thought was going to happen with the touchscreen failing. Like, did they think that everyone's going to be like, oh, fuck this. I only watch election coverage with functional touchscreens. Let me turn to CNN, like, or PGN or whatever. No. So, like, I don't know. I felt like they were making too big of a deal out of the touchscreen. But there's a fire at a polling place in Milwaukee. For those of you who may not be great with geography, that is in Wisconsin. And Tom elects not to cover, but Kendall and Shiv berate him over this and about the importance of it while he downplays it, making him look bad at his job. Like, he's like, oh, well, when it becomes a story, I'll cover it. And they're like, no, it is a story. You need to be covering it now. Like, they look like they know what they're doing, and he looks bad, which sucks for him because we already know, again, from the 1 or 2 minutes that prior to the music, he already feels the pressure of this day. So for him to immediately early in the episode have Kendall and Shiv coming down on him like that, it's got to be a lot for good old Tom. But 100,000 ballots have been lost in this fire that takes place at this polling place in Milwaukee. So Shiv then pulls Tom to the side, and she starts to apologize for last episode's argument, the one on the balcony that was incredible. But Tom's indifference toward her apology kind of sparks a new argument that ultimately culminates with Shiv revealing the pregnancy that we've known about since, I want to say, episode 4. And what I loved about this scene is that even if you've chosen a side between Tom and Shiv, you have to acknowledge the fact that they're both right in what they said, as well as how much they've hurt each other. Like, it's not like I don't think you could say one is worse than the other at this point. Like, I'm inclined to say that Shiv is worse than Tom, but like at the end of the day, they've both been terrible to one another. And I think it is dishonest to act like Shiv is more of a victim because he questioned the pregnancy. So let's talk about this scene. Shiv worked up the nerve to tell Tom she's pregnant, particularly when he said the night before that she wouldn't be a good mother. So that definitely took a lot of effort on her part to work up the nerve to tell him this, only for him to question the validity of it, question whether or not she was being honest. And that's gotta sting for Shiv. And I think anyone with half a heart is gonna be like, ouch. Like, you work up to telling this guy that you're pregnant, given everything that's going on, he questions you, like, that's gotta fucking sting, man. But is he wrong for saying that? No, he's not. Like, I've been saying this whole time that everything these people do is a move. It's a play. It's a tactic. He says it. He's like, is this a tactic? He has no reason to believe that Shiv is above lying about a pregnancy as a tactic. I 100% believe she would do that. We know from prior seasons that Tom wanted to have a baby with her. So for him to be told she's pregnant in that moment, given how intense things have been between them, he has every right to question her authenticity. And I really dug that about this scene. Like, for me, it tracks. And I love the fact that you have two people who are on opposite sides and both are right, both are wrong, and there's full evidence to support, like neither one of, like there's evidence to support each person's stance. And I don't know, I really dug that about this scene. I love the idea that her lying about the pregnancy as a play and Tom feeling that to be told that in this moment, given everything that's going on, and for him to think that it's a play, the fact that all of that tracks, I don't know, I just really dug that. So, moving on, Shiv leaves this scene furious, again, rightfully so, since she was being honest. At the same time, I don't think that given the timing, we can even rule it out as a tactic, like I said. And yes, the pregnancy itself is not a tactic, but what I'm talking about ruling it out being a tactic, the timing of telling him. I don't want to say is a tactic, but I'm going to stop just short of is a tactic, and I'll say likely a tactic. So, like, even though, again, you in that moment, with him doubting her, you want to be like, oh, man, Shiv, that's got to suck. But at the same time, he's not wrong to think it, and in this moment, is it not a tactic that she chose to tell him at that time? So, I don't know. Again, wonderful scene. So she talks to Kendall and Roman, and we already know they don't give a fuck about Tom. So it was in this moment that I thought, oh shit, they about to get Tom the fuck out of here. Like, they seem fully on board. Like, they have for a long time. All Shiv had to do was say, yo, fuck Tom. And it had been a wrap. And that's what happens here. It looks like they're really going to... It looked like in this moment that they were really going to fire him. And they were fully on board with it. And that before the episode was over, Tom was going to be out of a job. But we will revisit this toward the end of this video. So the 100,000 votes are gone. Roman wants to say, fuck it, we've counted the rest. Macon's winning. Let's call it Wisconsin for Macon. We can't get those votes back. It is what it is. Shiv makes the point that Roman undoubtedly already knows that Milwaukee is blue and those votes will likely be Jimenez votes and that they would likely win him the state. Which, I mean, that's what happens here in Michigan. Like in Michigan, where I think Michigan's kind of considered a purple state right now, but by and large, it's like you can like on election days, you could see the Republican side building up this big lead, but it's building it up in these very low populated areas, like these rural areas where you have all these Republican voters, and you build up these leads, and you see like, oh, they got 60% of the vote to the Democrats, 30%. But then the key is when they go, Wayne County is still on the board, Oakland County is still, because this is where Detroit is, this is where Washtenaw County is, where U of M is, very, very liberal area. So we'll be watching election coverage for Michigan, and every time the Republicans can jump out to a big lead, but then and it not to say that it gets vanquished every time. It doesn't. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But that big lead never persists, because once the Wayne County votes start coming in, Detroit, the suburbs that immediately surround Detroit, the college towns where Michigan is, where Michigan State is, when those votes start coming in, the tide shifts. And that's what we see right here. And I think that's the case that they're making. Milwaukee is a big city in Wisconsin. Shiv is making the case. Those Milwaukee votes matter. They're probably going to be blue, and they're probably going to make this go in a different direction. But of course, like I said, Roman knows that. Of course, that's the very same reason Roman wants to call it and move on, because he probably knows it'll go in the other direction if they find a way to get those votes counted. So, or do a revote like Shiv suggested. Roman even goes so far as to have that Ravenwood dude. Is it Ravenhood? Ravenwood? I don't know. It's a weird last name for a person that lives in a world that we're supposed to look as real. Like, if it was like Harry Potter or some shit, I'd be like, yeah, Ravenwood. But I'm like, yeah, there's people in real life with that kind of name. Anyway, Ravenwood, whatever. Roman goes so far as to have that dude pump out a conspiracy theory that the Democrats essentially saw the writing on the wall. It was like, yo, burn that bitch up, son. just to throw a wrench in all this fucking shit, right? Then Roman later adds that all they need to do is support Mencken for him to block the Gojo deal, and we learn a couple of things here. One, I think this is the moment where we begin to come to the understanding that Kendall and Roman are far more concerned with killing the Gojo deal and thus retaining their own power than they are with potentially ruining the country by electing a fascist who uses words like clean in his victory speech. Like, I don't know any other context where the word clean is cringe other than that one. But the way the actor who plays Mencken delivered that speech, the language in it, this very thinly veiled, I don't know, it's not a euphemism if it's a covering up, it is still a euphemism. Covering up all of these like hidden terrible meanings. Really, really interesting scene. And then two, we also begin to understand what this show is trying to tell us about the influence that the media has in this country. You know, it's at this point I paused the episode, and me and my wife talked about this aspect of the episode and the show as a whole. And, you know, we like to think our votes count and matter, and that we decide elections in our democracy. But we see in these scenes with Roman trying to influence the outcome that the narrative is really what matters. Like, we like to think reality fuels the narrative. You know, Wisconsin, Mencken got X amount of votes. Jimenez got X amount of votes. The narrative is about the reality. Mencken has less votes than Jimenez. Jimenez wins the state. That's the narrative that's based on reality. In this episode, though, we learned that the narrative can fuel the reality. And that, to me, is scary. Like, does it matter that the lost/burned votes in Milwaukee were likely Jimenez votes, and that those votes would have won him Wisconsin and could have won him Wisconsin in the election? It should, and it may matter if court battles happen, but the only thing that mattered in this episode was that the media said he won, and the population was none the wiser regarding the fact that they had no basis for saying that. And us, the country, people like myself, if I'm watching CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, no matter what way they may lean, I still at the very least trust them to do the bare fucking minimum and accurately report election results. So to watch this and to see like even that can be something that's partisan, like the results themselves. That's scary, man. And to think that like that would work. Like if I'm watching Fox News or CNN, I believe in them to do that bare minimum. So if Fox News says Republican candidate won X state, I'm not gonna be like, well, they're lying because it's Fox News. I trust them to do that bare fucking minimum. And this episode told me to not trust them to do that bare fucking minimum, and that the narrative is what matters, not the reality. And that, I think, is the scariest thing that we take away from this episode. So, when you see that, and you think about 2016 and that feeling of there's no way Donald Trump is going to become president, and you think about that feeling you had when you slowly came to the realization that he was, in fact, going to be president, you can't help but have, I think, a little bit of PTSD as you watch the world's elite decide to make a guy president who very well may not have won the votes. I also want to point out how interesting it is what power can do to you. Like, I mean, it was what, like episode 5 that Kendall had to convince Roman to sabotage the Gojo deal? And now here we are in episode 8, and look at Roman with just the thought of being able to align himself with the president. Nobody goes harder for completing the Gojo deal than Roman does. For stopping the Gojo deal than Roman does. And again, like I said, 3 episodes ago, he had to be coerced into it. And I'm just sitting there like, dude, you didn't even want to do it 3 episodes ago. You had to do the deal and get out just like your dad wanted. And now here you are being king fucking asshole to essentially subject the country to a fascist because you really, 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 really want to fucking wreck the Gojo deal. Like, it's so self-serving. Anyway, they called Wisconsin for Macon, which ties the electoral count at 262 with Arizona only left to report and seemingly going red, which makes Roman want to call the state and thus the entire election. But both Kendall and Shiv are hesitant due to concerns over having gone too far, making a guy like Macon president. And this leads into one of my favorite scenes, I think, of the entire series. Definitely of this season, but possibly of the entire series. And it's when Kendall and Shiv have this conversation. And Kendall is shockingly open and honest in this scene. He talks about his desire to be in charge. Like, I feel like I can run this thing. I felt that way. But also not really wanting it to get in the way of family, which is a very honest thing because I don't think any of them would give that leverage. Like, I don't want to go too far because I don't want to fuck up what we all got together. I don't think anyone would give up that. So it was interesting to me to hear Kendall say that. He also expresses concern over the conflict of wanting to get out of the Gojo deal, but also not wanting Macon to be president, showing a little bit of morals for Kendall as well. And in a moment that makes me want to remind you that Tom was right to ask Shiv if the pregnancy thing was a tactic, Shiv encourages Kendall in the way that we all know he needs by calling him a good guy. But again, we know this plays into Shiv's hands. If she can convince Kendall to not back Roman and stand firm on his feeling of Macon being a bad choice, she gets what she wants. A Jimenez presidency and a cushy job overseeing her brothers as Macon's right-hand woman. And the thing that she's been plotting for ever since she got her feelings hurt, when she found out that they kind of iced her out in their decision to thwart the Gojo deal. But oh, Shiv, dear Shiv, whenever someone says you're the smartest of the kids, we will kindly refer them to her decision to fake this phone call with Nate to push him on the regulation issue. Like, this is going to be the thing. Oh, Shiv's the smartest of the show. You remember when she faked that phone call to Nate? Kendall decides to call Nate himself after she fakes it. She pretends like she's on. Side note, she pretends like she's on the phone and you hear the doo-doo-doo, we're sorry, the number. And I'm like, you didn't even have to actually call a number. Like, if you stepped out of the room, you could have just put the phone up to your ear and moved your mouth like you were talking. But anyway, Kendall decides to call Nate himself, and which, again, another smart move by Kendall, and is undoubtedly met with confusion from Nate regarding a Shiv phone call. And then he talks to Greg, and it's at this point we can see on everyone's face that the shit is about to go down. And can I take a brief pause here to point out just how much I love the Kendall character and what this show does with him. And do I love Kendall as a person? No. But do I love the Kendall character? Absolutely. Like, in this moment, Kendall looks smart, and he does look like a good guy. He goes to his sister to talk about this crisis of conscience. Hell, he has a crisis of conscience. He's then suspicious of her Nate phone call ruse and makes the smart move of calling Nate himself. But then he learns what Shiv did, and he comes back in there, and he throws it all away because his sister hurt his feelings. And it's just like, you were looking really sharp up to that point. But then he comes back in there, he throws it all away. I loved when he called her a piece of dirt, because it's like, he wanted to go way harder than that, but because it's his sister, he couldn't bring himself to use a harsher word. So he delivered dirt with the same energy as he would have a worse word. And I think that was kind of like what not fucked with me, but like what I really took away from that scene. Like, if he was going to call her the C word, he delivered dirt with the same energy that one would deliver the C word. And I thought, like, man, that was pretty badass. But like I said, he threw it all away because his sister hurt his feelings. You know, it's like, my sister gave me sad, so the country just gonna have to have a Nazi president now. Like, what? So you can get back at your sister, the whole country has to go to shit. But that's Kendall in a nutshell, right? Many times, he's looked like the best person to run Waystar. But then also many times, he's not been a serious person. And this was one of those times. I love the serious person thing from Logan. Like, I'm going to use that because it works so well to describe them at times. And I think it works best right here in this episode. Anyway, Shiv threatens to go public with their dirt. And we hear her telling Matsson that she's going to fuck them over. And she's got a lot she could divulge. So I wonder if we're going to take it that far in these final 2 episodes. That's why I said it at the top that we're kind of setting up things to get way worse in these final 2, because she could talk about all kinds of shit about these guys that could make things get way uglier and way nastier. And with one of the 2 episodes being Logan's funeral, you have to think too, if that does happen, the likelihood of something really messy happening at Logan's funeral, I think, is pretty high. So Tom comes in, and Kendall and Roman tell him to call Arizona and the election for Mencken. And now, if you'll recall, earlier I said we revisit the moment where it sounded like Kendall and Roman were on the cusp of axing Tom. Look how the tables have turned by the end of the episode. Kendall and Roman are now staunchly anti-Shiv, as is Tom, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend, so of course Tom is going to do exactly what the fuck Kendall and Roman say without hesitation to curry favor with them and fuck Shiv, and not fuck Shiv like, you know, in a good way, but fuck Shiv over and potentially save his job. Like, well done. There's an interesting moment near the end where you wonder if Greg is going to be that one small and insignificant person who changes the course of history. Like, he's talking with Jess about the possibility of not telling the control room to call the election. And it's an interesting conversation because like he points out, it ultimately probably won't matter. Like, someone's going to come along later. Tom walks right behind him in the room and deliver the same information, and everything is still going to likely play out the same way. But I think Greg is struggling to come to grips with the role he would then have played in something that was potentially terrible. And I like if for me, if I looked at Mencken, if I'm Greg, well, no, I'm going to be myself, Mike, and I am opposed to Mencken in a very strong way, even if I know my menial task of, hey, this is a note that says Mencken wins, give it to the control room. And all I know is that all I'm going to be involved with is handing a note to someone else. I'm not going to not make no announcements. I'm not telling nobody shit. I'm not fucking with no votes, nothing. I'm just handing somebody a piece of paper. I'm still going to be like, yo, what if I don't hand this piece of paper? Because I'm going to have to, live with that. Let's say everything goes to shit. 3 years down the road, I'm going to be sitting there like, what if I hadn't handed that fucking paper? What if I hadn't handed the paper? So I think it's interesting that Greg kind of has this moment where it looks like he might not do it, and he does it, and Tom comes in right behind him. And again, like he said, it was ultimately moot, but I like that moment of like, this is it. Do I want this to be my role or not? And am I comfortable with playing a part in something that is potentially as terrible as this could be? And I don't know. I think it's an interesting situation for a person to be in. You know, he being Greg, largely insignificant, but in that moment, he probably felt like he could change the course of history. And maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if you choose not to try and things go left that's what Greg's gonna have to live with. So, great episode. I have a couple of quick thoughts. The first few are about Greg, which is why I saved this kind of like Greg portion for the end here, because I thought Greg had an interesting episode. I've been saying all season how I'm just wondering like if Greg is making moves or not. Like I'm kind of not suspicious, but like curious. Like what is he up to? Is he up to something? Do we find out he was hanging out with Matsson? He was drinking things that aren't normally drinks. He tells Tom about Shiv and Matsson's little deal in this episode. I don't know. I think there continues to be interesting moves here made by Greg. He has an interesting scene later with Shiv where she goes off on him over his relationship with Tom and telling him about Lucas, and she's like, you basically like back the fuck off. And Greg's like, yeah, but what is my silence gonna cost you? And I thought that was an interesting kind of move for him, right? And she just and in this scene she just like she doesn't even give an answer like a dollar figure or fuck you. She just leaves and she says something like, "I'll pull your intestines out through your asshole." I don't know what she said, but she dismisses him and leaves. And I'm only further convinced that the dismissal of Greg, and we see it here too in this episode where someone says something like, "Oh, we're not going to talk to Greg," and they all hang up their phones. Like the constant dismissal of Greg, I feel more and more like that's going to be the thing that ends up ruining them. Like I don't think, and I'm not sitting here saying that I think Greg's going to run Waystar Royco. I'm not saying that, but I feel like the underestimating and dismissal and sometimes downright calloused treatment of Greg is gonna be what ends up ruining them. I like how Matsson said Greg was hanging out with him as a normalist. I don't know. I mean I could figure out what it means by context, but like what a weird thing to say. Kendall has people tailing Rava, and he didn't tell her, and she calls him in a panic, and he explains what he did and why he just actioned it. And he repeats that he does everything he does is for them. And not only was his final decision the one to spite Shiv, to call Arizona for Matsson and the election for Mencken. Not only was that about him, but it put his family even further in harm's way as non-whites, if you buy into what everyone has said about Mencken so far. So he's sitting there like, everything I do is for you guys, when he had the right decision at his hands, he made the wrong one because he was being petty and angry with his sister. And it was so far, like his family was so far away from being a concern of his that he didn't even think that putting Mencken in that position of power would put his brown ass, non-white ass family in trouble. So I thought that was good too. And then lastly, actually no, two more things. Is PGM blaming Tom, this whole thing of this election thing, and ATN's coverage? Is that going to come back around? And then lastly, this episode was hilarious. Lots of great lines, lots of great moments. I couldn't even possibly take the time to highlight them all, but I do want to shout out my man getting wasabi in his eyes and Greg pouring only slightly lemony LaCroix in his eyes, or LaCroix. I don't know how to say it. I don't fucking drink it. But yeah, I thought that was great. So great episode. We got 2 more left. I will see you guys next week for the penultimate episode of the entire series next Monday. And until then, peace.